Thank you to the GPA folks for putting this on, taking the time. Thanks to everybody else for coming. Congratulations to the second years who graduated. Welcome to the first years who are also done. Feeling very free myself. So I will be yapping at you for about 50 minutes on neurofeedback and more broadly thinking biologically about mental health. That's the theme I'd like you to take away from this, is thinking biologically about mental health, if anything. I'm going to repeat that a dozen times. So I'm Nigel Barnum. Surprise, most of you know me. Student in the program, first year. Background in psychology, background in like meditation, took an approach to biological approaches to mental health. Like 10 years ago, I got interested in that and have just been poking away at it since. I run the private practice Hamilton Neurofeedback. That's my logo. Shout out ChatGPT. And yeah, I'll just jump in. Here's what this talk is not going to be. Jargony, technical, mechanistic. I'm not going to bore you with like alpha wave, beta wave, theta wave ratios. I'm going to be as general as I can. It is not going to be cutting edge research in a field you don't know a thing about. The goal is to be generally informative over specifically informative, or another thing to stress about needing to know. This should be what it's intended to be, is engaging, interesting, stimulating more than anything else. It's an opportunity for me to share my lived experience receiving neurofeedback and giving neurofeedback. I kind of tie what neurofeedback is into the narrative arc of my own experience of it. The cool thing about neurofeedback is like, I don't take it personally that my brain needed some work. You can talk about it in a way you can't really talk about in psychotherapy. The goal, like I said, think differently about mental health, biologically instead of psychologically. Also, secretly, this is an opportunity for me to talk about one of my favorite things, so thank you all. When I say biologically over psychologically, what does that mean? I'm going to make this distinction early in this talk between mind problems and brain problems. You can think of this as well as like software issues versus hardware issues. So first off, this is not meant to diminish the role of psyche or kind of mind in suffering. All of us are here because we opt into the fact that that can affect your functioning. Like CBT wouldn't work if the mind didn't affect your wellness, your suffering. Instead, what I'm asking is, what is the psyche resting on? If you've got a mind problem, is it not also resting on a brain in some way? Here are some examples to help us think about this. Have you ever had the experience of feeling psychologically worse because of anxiety? This was an example from the test talk I gave of this, so thanks for the feedback, folks. Like having a few drinks, staying up late, waking up in the morning and being like, I don't feel good. Is that a mind problem? Is that a psychological problem or a biological problem? The answer is, nah, probably a bit of both. Being hangry. Is that a psychological problem? It's a psychological symptom, but it's kind of a biological problem. So it's a mind symptom, but a brain body kind of problem, so to speak. What about feeling pessimistic when you're sick? Am I the only one who feels like literally everything sucks, like the day before you get sick and you're like, oh, thank God, I'm just getting sick. Like nothing's actually wrong. So on the other side, have you ever had the experience of feeling psychologically better after exercising or after doing breath work, deep breathing, meditation, after taking a cold shower or going in the sauna? These things which have some research supporting, they'll make you feel better. Eating good food, getting a good night's sleep, basically all the advice that your mom would give you if you were feeling not good. Go take care of yourself, take care of your body, your biology, you'll psychologically feel better. So this talk is meant to emphasize the role of biology in suffering and how changing biological functioning can reduce psychological suffering. So, general overview, I'm going to talk about how I discovered neurofeedback as a biological treatment, my own experience receiving it, and kind of layer in what neurofeedback is through that. We're going to talk about how to think about neurofeedback as a therapist, I'm going to keep this in plain English, takeaways for all the people in this room. The intersection of biological treatments and psychotherapy through a woman named Seaburn Fisher's work with attachment trauma. This is like my favorite topic. You will see the excitement when I get there. I'm going to maximize so I can see enough people here. By show of hands, who is familiar with the phrase biohacking? If your camera's not on, no worries. We've got one hand, two hands. Like raise a hand if you're in the chat and you're actually able to. Okay, we got actually more than I expected. So that is my on-ramp into this. Who's familiar with like wearables that can kind of track your mental health, your physical health, like a Garmin, an Oura Ring? Yeah, okay, I'm wearing one now. I show that off every time. Who's seen this? Who's seen a Muse headband? Anybody? Hands? Okay. Yeah. So Muse is neurofeedback. We'll get into that. What this is basically guided meditation. You put this little band on your head. I'll give away the secret sauce now. It senses the electrical activity of your brain and says, when you're in good meditation mode, when the electricity of your brain is meditative, we're going to reward that. It's like training wheels for meditation. Who's familiar with neurofeedback more broadly? Yes. Okay, the people who I've given some talks to. And no hands besides. That's kind of what I expected. Not offended. Thank you, Mo. Thanks, Juriel. Who's familiar with like other biological tech for mental health? On the left, we've got red light therapy, but like for your brain. This is a company out of Toronto. And on the right, we have RTMS. This is like the big magnet that they put over your brain that can do treatments of anybody heard of these things? Yes, I've got some thumbs and hands. Great. That's good. Gives me a basis. So, what the hell is neurofeedback? I will get in where I first learned about it. Here is an excerpt from my second year abnormal psych textbook, back when they called it abnormal psych, before it was renamed clinical. This is literally the first place I ever read about the subject. And I took a picture of it because I still have a textbook. Why not? So it says biofeedback. I'll explain that distinction in 1 second. I'm going to read out the first like 3 sentences. Biofeedback is a process of making patients aware of specific physiological functions that ordinarily they would not notice consciously, like their heart rate, blood pressure, muscle tension in specific areas of the body, EEG rhythms, that's brain waves, that's neurofeedback, why it's highlighted. I'll explain that in a second. And patterns of blood flow. This is the first step, but the second step is more remarkable. In the 1960s, Miller reported that rats could learn to directly control many of these responses. He used a variation of operant conditioning procedures in which the animals were reinforced for increases or decreases in their physiological responses. I'm going to summarize the gist of the important information there. We've got an unconscious physiological process in the body, which can be learned to be consciously controlled through operant conditioning. You can reward someone for changing an unconscious physiological process in their body. So that includes the electrical activity of the brain, EEG rhythms, like electroencephalograph is what EEG stands for. Basically, it means brain activity. Biofeedback versus neurofeedback, just to make that distinction really quick. Biofeedback is any physiological signal. So like heart rate, how sweaty your fingers are, etc. Neurofeedback is a type of biofeedback. All other biofeedback is not neurofeedback. Just very quickly, in the literature, those things are not distinguished well. Neurofeedback has 10 different names. I call it neurofeedback. So what the hell is neurofeedback? Again, let's visualize how it works. So 1, you, the participant, are alive and there's electricity in your brain, at least we'd hope. That electricity is recorded. We've got something which measures and records that electricity, usually just like sensors on your head, or if you've seen those big nets that you put on someone's head to detect their brain activity. We're recording that activity and then processing it. So instead of it being this kind of raw, like it looks like if you've ever seen a polygraph on a TV show, those like little bars fluttering up and down, that's what it looks like raw. 60 years ago, it was like uninterpretable. Now it's something you can put into a computer that says, oh, your brain activity is more relaxed now. It's like 75% relaxed, or it's more focused now. It's 95% focused, whatever that is. So when you can clearly abstract and represent brain activity like that, you can generate feedback about it. So that might look like a green check mark appearing on a screen or a bell ringing. It is feedback that is then given to the participant about the internal state of their brain. So that operant conditioning to teach someone how their brain is functioning and teach them to manipulate it over time. What you can do with that, which one, that's super cool off the bat. I'm clearly going to be a nerd for this throughout, but you can think of this like behaviorism on a really tight feedback loop. Instead of like mouse behaves over here and then gets feedback from its environment and really slowly kind of learns, it's like the second your brain becomes relaxed, we go, good, good, great, good. Keep doing that. Over time, you can change the threshold for reward and make it harder and harder and harder to get rewarded for it, meaning you have to produce more and more activity to change the resting state of your brain to be more relaxed. Basically, like adding extra weight to the barbell of being relaxed. You can change it so that instead of getting this acute change and feeling quite relaxed, you get this longer term, in most cases, permanent change in someone's resting state activity of their brain and how they feel. So, to visualize this is broken into 3 steps, same deal. 1, you've got a person with some sensors on their head. 2, those sensors are detecting the electrical activity of their brain, and a technician, this nice nurse-looking woman, is in the room, making sure that that activity gets harder and harder over time. They're checking in with you, they're making sure you're not overwhelmed. They're basically sitting with you for a 20 or 30-minute session and acting like a personal trainer for your brain with the feedback they have from that kind of machine processing. That information from the computer on 2 goes into 3. Green check mark appears every time you're relaxed. Bell rings every time you're relaxed, whatever it is. Great. Doesn't have to be just relaxation. You can change any brain activity. So this could be treating ADHD by enhancing focus. This could be treating trauma by, again, calming someone down and bringing them kind of closer to center. There are so many interesting applications of this. I'm not going to get into the details, keeping it general. Here's where I next heard about neurofeedback. This concerned-looking man is Dave Asprey. Does anybody know this name? No? I'm not at all surprised. He's like Andrew Huberman's like slightly weirder, kind of like a shill of an uncle, kind of like father of the biohacking movement. This is literally the second place I ever heard about neurofeedback. I'm going to play this video. He talks about kind of the effects of this for 45 seconds. So enjoy.
EEG equipment sitting in my labs in my backyard that I use on myself, on my wife, on my kids. My kids actually get neurofeedback too. Talk about someone on earth really struggling to get their mind working, to just show the mind what it's doing. From one perspective, it's a mirror. It shows your mind what it's doing. Your mind doesn't know that it's flopping around. Your mind doesn't know that it's doing things that aren't productive to try and keep you alive. With 40 years of Zen, with neurofeedback, things like that, you just become aware of the voices in your head. And I eventually got mine to turn off. So there isn't a voice in my head. It just went away. And that was precious.
So 2 things worth noting. Neurofeedback's like a mirror for your brain. This is another great analogy. If you don't know what's happening inside your brain, you don't know if it's effective or not. Sometimes it's flopping around uselessly. Sometimes it's doing great things. This is like a mirror to see what's happening. And second, the hook that got me, this guy is very good at hype, which, again, keep that in mind throughout this talk. I'm kind of bought into some hype. This got rid of the voice in my head, was like, oh my God, that sounds super cool. I totally want to try that. I've been meditating for a few years at this point, and it was like, well, voice in your head equals bad, so why not get rid of it? So I tried. This was my first experience with neurofeedback at the Kingston Institute of Psychotherapy and Neurofeedback. This is a clinic that is shut down in Kingston, where I went to university. Here's my experience. I was brought into a small treatment room, some sensors attached to my head. I was listening to this kind of like long, calming, meditative song, and every time my brain flopped around, every time it kind of tripped over itself or made these like sudden changes, there was a little bit of an interruption in that piece of music. And all that was doing was cueing me to notice when my brain was acting erratically, so to speak, when there was kind of like turbulence or just ineffective activity in my brain. So what did that do? I left sessions feeling calm. Remember, I left 5 sessions or so feeling like, yeah, I'm nice and relaxed. This is cool. No idea. And then boom, like session 7 or 8 rolls around, and I left feeling like so calm I didn't know what to do with myself. I felt like a fish who had been returned to water. Just like all of a sudden, instead of being in my mind and distracted, I was in my body. I could feel everything going on inside of me. I was like socially attuned in a way that I wasn't normally. It felt like I had meditated for 5 hours. I've never done that in my life, but it just felt like I was totally smooth. I had some spontaneous emotional processing happen during sessions and after sessions. So my grandfather passed away the summer before. I remember sitting in a session and just like all of a sudden, for whatever reason, the mental state, the brain state that I was being put into let me get in touch with these feelings that I kind of had left, like grief that had not been processed. That was an effective processing. I'll get over to some ineffective processing in a second. There was carryover to my day-to-day. I felt more calm, more relaxed in general, more in myself, so to speak, more like myself. Side effects. Some things were left unprocessed. I had some suppressed emotions that came up, which I just didn't have a good therapeutic frame to process. And actually, that was part of the reason I stopped doing this, was it became overwhelming. I did like 10 sessions. You normally do something like 30. And I got busy with my thesis and I was like, this is just too stressful. Like, I can't risk having these things come up and not being able to process them. So where I next heard about neurofeedback was the book, The Body Keeps the Score. So again, read the room. Who's familiar with the book, Body Keeps the Score? Show of hands, thumbs up, whatever it is. Got a number of people. It's usually about half in a room like this. If you're familiar with it, a lot of people are excited about this book. A lot of people love this book. I love this book. It was life-changing. If you're not familiar, it's basically just a masterwork on trauma. It's an incredible introduction. If you're looking to understand what trauma is, this is the book to start with. There's a chapter in this book on neurofeedback. I was super hooked again. This idea had kind of come and gone for me. I was like, okay, there's really something here. I really have to pursue this. Most people have read this and kind of glaze over it. Here's a graph of tweets on neurofeedback over time. I want you to guess when The Body Keeps the Score came out. It was there. This book had an incredible impact on public awareness, one, of trauma, but two, of neurofeedback. I think about a third of the clients who come in for a phone consultation will come in and mention this book to me, even still, like 10 years after it came out. So if you're looking for resources, that chapter is an incredible place to start. I would recommend that. What this did for me, and how I'll explain neurofeedback to you, is it described the differences between the brains of people with trauma and people without. These kind of like stereotyped or like patterned differences. It described the normalization of those differences in brain activity, which corresponded with symptom remission as a result of neurofeedback. So doing neurofeedback made the brains of people who had experienced trauma look like the brains of people who hadn't experienced trauma. It focuses on the work of Sieber and Fisher, who I'm going to mention later, and the research of Ruth Lanius at Western, a psychiatrist, who, fun fact, co-published with Andrea, our research prof. Like all of our shared research prof has worked with that woman. So that was super exciting for me. Ruth is also an awesome, awesome person. Okay, this is about as technical as this talk's going to get. We're talking about brain waves. Who knows brain waves? The electrical activity of the brain. Big familiarity. Yes, yes. So in absolute brief, these are the units that we work with in neurofeedback. A lot of people have probably heard alpha waves are good. Maybe you've done like some binaural beats or something, or you go like some alpha wave meditation on YouTube. Without getting too specific, from the lowest on this chart, the most blue to the most light blue, you have slow waves that go to fast waves. The speed there is just the number of times a second the neurons on a given spot on your head are firing. So that's the frequency or the hertz. Those are broken into these different categories: delta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma. Specifics are unimportant. The interesting thing is that the slower the wave, generally the lower arousal that state is in your body. So like delta waves are being deep, deep sleep. Beta waves are like a busy, active mind, way up the top. Um, let's see. This is what that looks like live. So this is that kind of polygraph thing I mentioned earlier. This is what a live neurofeedback recording looks like. On the right, you see these green circles. I have no idea how well people can see this. Those would be someone's brain. So each of those might say delta, theta. The different circles are the different types of brain activity. And then the different rows with the little kind of squigglies coming from them, that's the electrical activity at a certain site on the brain, certain area. So for this example, you can see the theta, that kind of top right circle. The top of that circle is someone's nose, the left is their left ear, the right is their right ear. That would show excess theta activity. Red just means a lot of it. So excess theta, maybe a little bit of excess alpha. This is just in this 5-second snippet of this person's activity. They randomly had too much theta. Here's the cool part. This is called a QEEG. You don't need to know the specifics of it. This is a quantitative electroencephalogram. Big word for picture of your brain. This is one of the cooler parts of neurofeedback, is that a really skilled neurofeedback technician could look at these different brain maps. This is like, I am told, stare at that wall for 10 minutes, and I do. And you get this kind of like resting state scan of someone's brain. This is kind of like their brain at rest. Someone who's really skilled at interpreting these can look at someone's brain without knowing their diagnosis and say they definitely have ADHD. That is an ADHD brain, 100%. Sometimes someone comes in and they're like, I'm struggling with anxiety. And you go, actually, your brain looks more like an ADHD brain. We're going to try to combine a treatment for both of those. A really skilled neurofeedback practitioner will look at someone's brain, they're kind of like their stereotyped pattern of difference based on their diagnosis and their symptoms, and then triangulate a treatment based on that. To say, we've got a brain that looks like ADHD, but you're describing anxiety. Let's try anxiety first. Then maybe we mix in some ADHD types of treatments, things that will change the resting state function of your kind of abnormal brain to look more like a normal brain. Here's an example. This is the actual QEEG, a pre and a post from a woman I know who's a neurofeedback practitioner. She had debilitating panic disorder and OCD. She did 30 treatments over 6 months or so and had complete symptom remission and no panic attacks at 10-year follow-up. Here's the cool part. And I'm not going to go so much into detail. Remember the beta waves, this kind of brain waves. Beta generally associated with like an active mind. It can be focus and presence. I'm in beta right now. I am presently attending this. Higher levels of beta or higher frequencies of beta are associated with anxiety. And from like the 17, you can see on the pre-treatment side, that excess redness kind of labeled from 17 hertz to like 25 hertz or whatever. That's an excess of beta. That's a lot of beta activity in this person's brain. Pre-treatment. Post-treatment, their brain looks significantly normalized, which corresponded with their symptom remission. That to me is this really fascinating way of triangulating treatment effectiveness. I also think if you were to treat this person psychologically and just give them a QEEG pre and post, you could get a sense of the brain level changes that happened, not just the mind level changes. On the mind level, you can report, I'm suffering, I'm anxious, I don't know what's happening. On the brain level, you can't report that, but you can see it with something like a QEEG. Going to get everyone's cameras out of the way of my next slide. This was my next experience with neurofeedback. I did the kind of proper thing. After reading The Body Keeps the Score, I was like, yeah, there's something here. I really need to do this. I went to the Toronto Neurofeedback and Psychotherapy Center. This is a funny one. Who knows Nicole McCants? Does anyone know that name? She's a woman. She's like the psychotherapy, like scale your practice influencer. You're gonna hear her name 1,000 times if you're going into private practice. Um, she used to run this clinic. Just fun fact, because I know like two people in the crowd who don't know, or I can't see, or like, oh my God, that's crazy. Um, it's now called New Vista Mental Health. They just rebranded after she sold the clinic. My experience here, I did one of those QEEGs. So I got this like resting state. Like, what does your brain look like just at rest? What does your brain look like when you're not actively trying to do anything? I had a clinician. I did my own symptom intake. I was like, I'm struggling with, and I'll tell you all this, anxiety. That was the thing that sucked. Like, I couldn't regulate anxiety. And I had a clinician go, let's triangulate between what I'm seeing on the Q and what your symptoms are. And they designed a protocol. I did sessions now with the help of a technician, someone in the room to basically attune themselves to me and make sure that I wasn't getting overwhelmed, make sure that I was effectively trained via the protocol. This is some nerd speak. The protocol was I was rewarded every time there was synchronous firing of nodes in the executive control network. In English, that means every time my prefrontal cortex, every time my like ability to self-regulate fired in a synchronous way. So you think of the nodes in a network of the different parts of a brain network that are firing. If they're not firing in synchrony, that looks like one's talking super loud and one's not listening. Or that looks like both are talking at the same time and no one's listening. Synchronous firing of nodes in a brain network is like one's talking, the other one's listening. And then they switch and they learn to communicate effectively. I was rewarded based on my own intake every time my executive control network, my prefrontal cortex, was able to function effectively and talk to itself well. So that's teaching self-regulation skills. The same way that like therapy, or in a different way from therapy, can teach self-regulation skills through the mind, this is teaching self-regulation skills through the brain. What I actually did, this still blows my mind to be able to tell you this. I watched Seinfeld reruns, and every time the executive control network fired in synchrony, like in that effective communication, it played in color and sound. When it wasn't playing in color and sound, my brain wasn't firing in that way. We could detect when it was all synchronous. So by watching Seinfeld, I experienced this extreme sense of calm, a calm I hadn't experienced before, a sense of presence and this release of like physical tension. I remember like leaving sessions and just being like, oh my God, I like feel relaxed. My spine feels chill. As someone who holds anxiety in my body, it just started to go away. I had these extremely vivid dreams. This is super common in early sessions. I had changes in my anxiety processing. I took out my journal from this time and I said, I wish I could use the familiar, imperfect way of processing anxiety that I'm used to. I just can't. Like, I was used to suppressing anxiety. And when that changed, that was difficult to do something different with, even if it was a more effective coping strategy. I had changes in my access and depth of emotions. Anxiety was suppressing my range of emotions. I was experiencing like sadness, joy, and fear. I probably came home from this clinic in Etobicoke, driving back to Hamilton, just like literally crying tears of joy because I could feel them like a dozen times. It's not an exaggeration. By changing my brain's ability to handle stress in this kind of bottom up way, my top down psychology started to release. This was noted by my therapist at the time. Literally used the phrase leaps and bounds. It's like all of the things that I was trying to apply in the mind and psychotherapeutically, which I couldn't because I was too dysregulated, just started to hit the ground running. I had these long-term stable changes. These are things that still are the case for me. Just greatly enhanced self-regulation, less anxiety, and psychotherapy works much better than it did before. So I used to be someone who like just gritted my teeth and had a ton of like collateral damage and anxiety, and that just isn't the case anymore. That simply isn't the case anymore. I have one of these as a fact, the other one's a guess. Stable changes in my personality. So I know I went about a standard deviation down in neuroticism. I'm like temperamentally a worrier. I still am. It's just not impairing. I probably went a standard deviation up in conscientiousness. There's something strange, and some of you are probably thinking this or catching this theme. There's something really strange about going into a room and watching Seinfeld and having your personality change. It's a little bit dystopian. It's a little bit like, um, what are the implications of this? I'm not going to discuss that here, but it's a really interesting kind of philosophical thing to get to. Basically, this changed my life. And it's the reason I'm here giving you this talk. I would have been able to get through fine, but this was a missing piece from me. Side effects. Strangely, I had this like physical clumsiness. I forgot this completely, but like I was doing 2 sessions a week initially, and I was trying to like eat rice with a fork, and I just dropped the rice over and over. Um, I was at the beach with my girlfriend at the time and tried to like throw a frisbee to her, and something I could just normally do, and I just whip it at the ground like over and over. For whatever reason, the protocol I was doing gave me this physical clumsiness. It goes away. It went away for me after a day or two. Um, and some less fun ones. When the protocol changes happened, eventually we like added in some other nodes and different networks for firing synchronously, like anxiety talking very effectively to prefrontal control. When we got those wrong, because it's a bit of guesswork, I had this like week of just awful anxiety. Like 9 out of 10 didn't go away, no reason, just because my brain was like, I do not like this. Like we've actually woken up more anxiety than we've calmed down. That went away after a week. The brain likes to function well, and so it won't hold on to awful side effects. Here's how we're going to think about this. Who knows spoons? The Spoon's theory of mental health, or like Spoon's theory of disability, illness. Got like a couple. Yeah, some people do, some people don't. It's basically like you only have a certain amount of energy or spoons in the day. There's no reason it's spoons. You only have so much energy in a day. So you have to be conservative with your energy. Let's say like it takes 1 spoon to take your meds, and it takes 4 spoons to go to work. Especially for someone who's suffering with mental illness, you just don't have as much gas. This is like a normalization and destigmatization of having a lower function. Neurofeedback gives people more spoons, more total spoons. These biological treatments, which help people regulate their emotions and their brains more effectively, will just give you more spoons. Your spoons have a better value. They have a better conversion rate. Things cost less. Instead of it taking a third of your energy to go to work, it takes like a sixth. You get a greater restoration. So instead of having a crappy night's sleep, you have a great night's sleep, and you go, okay, like I'm going from totally drained to actually able to function. Another way to think about this, the window of tolerance. Assuming more people know window of tolerance than spoons, I could be totally wrong. The window of tolerance, you can see on the right there, you've got these two kind of bars. Within those bars, you can function optimally. But if you go above them, if you get too anxious, too aroused is the technical term, you get fight or flight and you just can't function well. You're like too distracted. If you go below those bars, you are like shut down. If you've ever written like 3 exams in 2 days and you go home and just like zone out on your couch, that's what being hypo aroused, being shut down is. Neurofeedback expands your window of tolerance. It expanded mine. It can expand many, especially if you're struggling with a condition that means you have a narrow window of tolerance. There's a larger sweet spot for arousal. It means you can just function within your kind of zone a little bit better. This just means more emotional flexibility and cognitive flexibility. Hint, it also means you can do better therapy. I'm sure a lot of the folks in second year, if you're working with people who have experienced trauma, especially, or any kind of like hyper arousal condition, or even low arousal condition like depression, you can't really do effective therapy if someone's not kind of in their zone where they can cognitively engage. Outside of the window of tolerance, you can't have someone make mind level changes if their brain can't get them there. This is a nerd way of saying it. There's changes in the dynamics of the homeostasis in the window of tolerance. You return to baseline faster. Let's say you get super anxious, you just simply get back into the sweet spot twice as fast, arbitrary, but you get there faster. and less impact from stressors. You are thrown outside of your sweet spot less. So, for whom is neurofeedback useful and why is it useful? I know at least one person in this room is saying, should I do this? The answer is, yeah, you totally could. Probably almost everyone can benefit from this. There's a normal distribution in response. Some people respond extremely well, some people respond not at all. You can think of this as like a medical intervention, like the statement everyone should be on SSRIs is pretty controversial, but the statement everyone should exercise maybe less controversial. Everyone knows they could probably be doing more cardio or whatever. You could think of this as like exercise for your brain just as validly as you could think of this as like a medical intervention for someone with a serious mental illness. Both of those are fine interpretations. This stuff gets used all the time in like finance and tech. The guys who have tons of money to blow and need really well functioning brains, they'll be like, sure, like just hook me up. I don't care. And they'll go from good to great. So I would encourage you to try it if you're curious. Second most, and this is the interesting thing for a room full of therapists, patients who are too dysregulated, who are too chronically outside of their window of tolerance to effectively engage in talk therapy. I'm going to make some jumps here. The goal is to build emotional and affective stability before doing the deep work of therapy. That's actually typically the goal in a lot of therapeutic modalities. Especially if you're doing work which itself can be affectively destabilizing. So if someone's trying to do an exposure, and that is going to be a very like affective or like arousal challenging thing, it brings them a lot of anxiety. What if you just brought the anxiety down? What if you treated them by hitting their brain, not hitting their mind, and then letting them do the work of showing themselves they're safe? Someone engaging in trauma work, like in DBT or ACT or EMDR, the first step in those types of therapy is often get stable. Like teach someone that they can tolerate emotional distress, expand that window of tolerance so we can engage effectively in therapy. This is a useful neurofeedback. These biological tools are incredibly useful synergistic tools for engaging in that kind of work. If you only speak DSM, here are some conditions that are evidence-based. I didn't put the meta-analyses in here because, frankly, we all finished school recently and I was way too tired to put in citations again. If you just Google or like scholar search like PTSD and neurofeedback, or any of these diagnoses, you can find at least a fair literature on it. The bottom point there, this is interesting. The leading practitioners in this field, just as in many fields, know things that the research hasn't had the time to play out. Just like CBT was effective before it was researched as effective, there are neurofeedback practitioners who are saying, like, I'm getting people with developmental delays, I'm giving them like IQ point boosts of 20 points. No idea if they're charlatans, if it's true, but people are applying this in many places and it's working well. And neurofeedback is just really hard to research. If a session takes about an hour and you need to do 30 sessions with 30 people for just the treatment group, not even the control group, that's like quick maths, like several hundred hours of treatment time. It's very difficult to research. I spoke with someone at Mac who does this work, Margaret McKinnon, who like doesn't want to do this work anymore. As amazing as this stuff can be and as important as it is to research, it's practically very hard. Here's where I am now. I started the private practice, Hamilton Neurofeedback. I'm not going to wax poetic about myself too long, but just to kind of give you the sense of where I am. I purchased neurofeedback equipment like 2.5 years ago. Yeah. Got certified, got some supervision. I networked like hell. You're welcome to ask about what that looks like. It was a really like freaky process at first, and then ultimately super rewarding. The whole thing has been incredibly rewarding. From like, I don't know if I can do this, and this seems hard, and this seems complicated, to like, I did it. Like most of it's behind me. Just like the one step at a time. Again, shout out ChatGPT for being amazing problem solver there. I trained myself, my family, my friends. I purchased some additional devices recently. This is what the actual setup looks like on the right. I pitched doing this in some private practices. Basically made like a PowerPoint slide deck for like, hey, here's why we should do this. Here's why this fits into the suite of services. Here's why it'll help clients. Here's how it'll generate revenue for the clinic. Be happy to talk about that as well. It's like a interesting, different thing to be like, here's why this is good for this clinic. Did that with Lifespan, which is the clinic I'm in right now. I worked there previously in a different capacity and just said, hey, can I keep doing this here? They were like, for sure. They had some background with it. Pitched it to Rand Health. It's a clinic like 3 blocks away from me in downtown Hamilton. So just like a close one. And then I'm doing my practicum at Niagara Neuropsychology, which is a clinic that combines neurofeedback and psychotherapy. So that's a bit of the kind of future of it. I get to help people with this. That's the really exciting part. Phil, I will send you this photo. I saw you lean in. I get to like pass on that self-regulation benefit. This is something that fundamentally changed my life, something that can grow and scale really effectively, something that's underappreciated, and something that can dramatically improve people's mental health. And now I get to pass it on. I am not a therapist yet. I am just a neurofeedback practitioner, so I can tell you testimonials. These will be scrubbed from my website in about a year's time or so. First, the brain injury robbed me of my confidence and emotional stability. Neurofeedback gave me my life back was a great excerpt. Another, I've transformed from a trauma-stricken individual to a more gratitude-filled person. Both of these people, I follow up with, a year or so later after they finish treatment. Both of them are still doing well. This is one of the important parts of neurofeedback is that acutely having, relaxation rewarded in your brain will make you calm, but chronically rewarding relaxation in your brain changes that brain essentially forever. It's not like lifting weights or running where you kind of need to keep doing it to stay in shape. It's like learning a skill. When your brain functions in a way that's optimal for it, it just wants to do that. It doesn't want to be anxious. And side benefit, I get to do neurofeedback. In the last month of school being very busy, it was like, yeah, I could use this tool. I can lean on this tool. Just like some people choose to look at it as exercise for your brain or keeping yourself calm. You can see on the right, I still do this now and then. The future, I'm going to combine psychotherapy with neurofeedback and practice for a few years, probably at other clinics just to get experience like Niagara Neuropsych, acquire some better neurofeedback tech and some other tools, and then eventually open up my own private practice, grow and scale that. If anyone in this room is jumping up and down and excited, which I see, yeah, some excitement, come join. Talk to me. This is my favorite thing. I love this topic and I hope to do really good work and I need excited people. I don't have a plug, the implied plug is I do this work and if you have clients that are struggling, I can help. But the literal plug is I could use someone to grow this with. It's a super cool and super passionate thing for me. So let's tie it together with some psychotherapeutic thinking. Does the existence of a good biological treatment mean therapy is irrelevant? No. Some problems are still more mind problems than brain problems. Absolutely. None of us would be here if we didn't believe that. We've got maladaptive beliefs, a lack of psychoeducation, difficulties in relationships, existential crises. Having your brain be more regulated, be more relaxed, be more focused, whatever it is, fixing whatever brain deficit you have, won't give you psychoeducation. It won't teach you the right way to function in the world. It won't help you relate to others better. But again, the line on mind-brain problems is subtle. Having a brain that's less chronically dysregulated might actually help you not engage in maladaptive beliefs so much. I know for me, those schemas are really sticky when I haven't slept and I'm really stressed. If my brain is less stressed for me, those schemas are less sticky. I would argue still, neurofeedback necessitates effective psychotherapy. So here's the woman herself. This is Seaburn Fisher. She is the focus of the chapter in the book, The Body Keeps the Score. She wrote the book, Neurofeedback in the Treatment of Developmental Trauma, Calming the Fear-Driven Brain. Keep your book titles under 10 words as a rule, but I'll give her the break. She treats attachment trauma with combined neurofeedback and attachment-oriented psychodynamic psychotherapy. So super quantitative on the neurofeedback side and super qualitative and like airy-fairy, like super depth psychology on the psychodynamic stuff. Her work is incredibly interesting. There is a really good idea in here that I'm going to try to explain to you. Who's vaguely interested in working with trauma in the room? Got a few, some so-sos, some thumbs. Yeah, sweet. So am I. Trauma's really interesting. This slide is possibly the coolest data I've ever seen in mental health, period. I'm going to explain it. I know there's a lot to look at. So first, I'm going to explain the default mode network. This is some neuroscience stuff, but it applies to a lot of therapy outcomes. It's really useful here. The default mode network is the brain network that happens when you're not doing anything else. It happens when you're just sitting still and looking straight forward. It happens when your mind is wandering about yourself, about your life. It is, in some sense, the seat of the sense of self. So when you are thinking about what happened to you yesterday, when you're thinking about what you're going to do in the future, who you are, who you'd like to be, all of those activities are captured in the default mode network, your sense of self. In the brains of people who have not experienced trauma, in control brains at rest, their default mode network is activated. That makes sense. They're experiencing the world as a stable sense of self, as a stable person. Under threat, in that kind of bottom left quadrant, the periaqueductal gray activates. Names aren't important. The threat center activates. This is a brainstem region which is associated with like mounting resources for fight or flight and like orienting towards stress. This is survival. In people with PTSD at rest, their default mode network isn't activated. But in people with PTSD, under threat, both their default mode network and their threat center are activated. The takeaway here, people with PTSD, people who have experienced trauma, their sense of self is inextricably linked to a feeling of threat. They do not know how to interpret themselves or the world without feeling under threat in some way. So Sebren's title on the previous page, Calming the Fear-Driven Brain. Fear is like the cosmic background radiation in the self of some of these folks. Here's why that makes sense. This is Alan Shore on the right. He wrote this book, Affect Regulation and the Origin of Self. I haven't read this book. It's discussed in Sebren's work. I've watched some podcasts with him. Apparently the book is titanic and awful. He discusses attachment trauma, as broadly speaking, your parents weren't good to you. You didn't learn how to effectively be a person because your parents didn't effectively teach you. Abuse, neglect, whatever it happens to be. His work suggests good enough parenting teaches this affect regulation and thus causes the emergence of a self. That looks like this. It looks like the B and C on this slide. So through the million repetitions of typically a mother caring for their infant, kind of 0 to 2, you are teaching them, oh, you're happy. This is amazing. Good. Yes, awesome. You're afraid. Okay. Oh, that's tough. You are showing them what it is to feel an emotion, what it is to regulate an emotion, and where the boundaries between themselves, their literal self, and the other, usually the mother, is. You are showing them who they are and how they can interpret their emotions in the context of who they are. You are like loaning them your brain in some way so that they can wire up through you. Thus, can't believe I would use that word in this talk. Attachment trauma is the failure of good enough parenting to imbue this affective regulation and a sense of self. This is the coolest part. For people who have experienced very severe trauma, Remember, we're talking about normalizing brains from PTSD type activity to normal activity. Neurofeedback reopens the critical window, so to speak, the opportunity of learning affect regulation, regulating your emotions, and thus can create a sense of self by functioning as someone who is deeply attuned, something which is deeply attuned to your internal state. By teaching you to regulate your anxiety, even later in life when it's not the million repetitions of mother to infant, you can have a sense of self emerge where before there was none. The 2 exclamation marks is important. In fact, the 3 exclamation marks is important. This is, I don't think there's an idea I'm more excited by in therapy. I don't think there's an idea that fundamentally I would argue that probably all of us are more excited by watching a version of someone emerge from themselves that before wasn't there. This latent experience of like being a full person, being a person who can engage in the hard things that they're struggling with, watching that emerge is beautiful. Critical takeaways from this work. Trauma is brain-based, brain and body-based. Neurofeedback stabilizes and regulates the brain. From this, a sense of self can emerge later in life. The deficit of ineffective parenting can be corrected. This allows somebody to experience emotions as a transient thing that is happening to them rather than being blended with that emotion, kind of like in ACT stuff. If you don't have a self, you just experience affect as this like wave that is happening to you. This leads to better therapeutic engagement. Patients who can actually engage in a therapeutic relationship deeply. If you don't have a self, you can't understand another or connect with another. This ultimately means faster and more intense engagement with trauma. So that means more skill as a psychotherapist is necessary, not less. If someone is radically able to engage with their feelings, if you remember me in those first 10 sessions, I had to stop because I didn't have a psychotherapeutic frame to hold the things that I was experiencing. So better therapists are necessary, not, so-so therapists. Risks, caveats, and asterisks. Here is the back half of everyone's like consent forms where they have to talk about risks. There is a normal distribution of response. Like most people respond reasonably well. Some people don't respond at all. Some people respond extremely well. I've had just as many people get nothing after 10 sessions as have done 2 and said, oh my God, this is going to change my life. There is a good chance I am just a hyper responder who told you the testimonials of 2 other hyper responders. Please have an asterisk around the hype that I have. Like therapy, this is expensive. It can take anywhere from 20 to 200 sessions. Sessions can cost as much as therapy. Personally, I would have spent 10 times what I did. And I would have spent 20 times what I did to invest 5 years earlier. It was that life-changing for me. There are side effects. I discussed these. It won't make life Disneyland. Nothing will. Stress is still real. You still get sick. Bad things happen to good people. Life is still hard at times, but having a brain that can support you can make a huge difference there. Some exciting futures. Better neurofeedback tools are coming out every day. Sessions take less time. Sessions are more effective. It takes fewer sessions to get to that kind of like sticking point, that kind of like resilient change. There are actually even more effective kind of biological treatments like RTMS and the SAINT protocol. This is basically a week of treating it like your full-time job to do RTMS, and people will just like come in like Beck's BDI at 40, like as depressed as you can be, BDI at 63, as depressed as you can be, and go to like fully remitted in a week, and it just stays around. Maybe they get a booster every now and then. That's worth keeping an eye on. This stuff is worth keeping an eye on. The combination of biology and psychotherapy is still young. So integrating psychotherapy into this, Sieber and Fisher is essentially pushing this forward, and her book came out 10 years ago. This is a new thing. What should we take away? Remember, mind problems and brain problems. That's one thing I can give you. Psychological problems can be solved biologically. If something feels as if it's rooted in the mind, ask yourself, is there a way that this is just like this person's parents didn't teach them to regulate their emotions effectively, and so their brain isn't actually allowing them to do the therapy. If your client's too dysregulated to do therapy, try adding a biological treatment. If someone's not responding after 10 sessions, they're like, I know what I should do. I know what I should think. I'm just too anxious to do it. Biological treatments can salve that anxiety and let them do good therapy. If you're curious, watch talks by Sebring Fisher, Ruth, or Bessel van der Kolk. Read Symphony in the Brain by Jim Robbins. I'll take a picture of this all if you're curious, or I can send you the slides. Read Neurofeedback in the Treatment of Ill-Known Trauma, Calming the Fear-Driven Brain. Read the chapter in The Body Keeps the Score, or do your own neurofeedback. This is what I would recommend the most. That at-home device like Muse or MindLift, they're relatively cost-friendly, and they can fundamentally change your life. New Vista is the clinic that I went to in Toronto, so shout out them, formerly Toronto Neurofeedback Psychotherapy. And that's it. Thank you, folks, for the attention. I'm like 1 minute on the hour. There's a bit of time for questions, so ask away.